Hey, this is Brent Leary, and it's a new week, although sometimes it feels like the same week and the same day over and over. But this is definitely a new week because this is the first time in about almost 5 years, I think, since I had an opportunity to speak to my buddy Dharmesh Shah, who is the co-founder and chief technology officer for HubSpot. Dharmesh, thank you for joining me, man. I really appreciate this.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Because I know that you really don't like doing this kind of stuff because you are an introvert. And I consider myself to be an introvert, but you're like an introvert on a whole other level. So I really appreciate you doing this for me.
No problem at all. Yeah, I like to joke that, we have this whole social distancing thing, and I've been training for this my entire life, right? This is not...
So the other thing I really enjoy about talking with you, and you're up in Boston, you're a Boston guy, but you're not a sports dude. You're not like your partner Halligan, who, Red Sox, Patriots. So I really appreciate talking to you.
Neutrality is what you're saying. That we can still be friends.
All right. So before we get going, because there's so many things I'd love to talk to you about, and we got limited time. But before we get going, I just had to share this picture because we kind of go back a ways. And this picture kind of illustrates just how far back we go. I mean, that's, when that was taken?
I'm going to guess around, I'll say 2007, maybe.
Close. It was 2008. I believe it was at the first Inbound, I think you called it the Inbound Summit back then.
Yeah, at the Sheraton Hotel in Cambridge. Yeah,
that's right. So this is, I think it's September 2008. Now I kind of look a lot different. You, other than the beard, you look pretty much the same, man.
Well, thank you. Just a little bit heavier. Got the beard, and yeah, life goes on. I think that might have been the last time I wore a collar on a shirt. No,
No, well, it's been a while. And so let's talk about that. I think I met you guys. You guys officially kind of started in June of 2006.
That's correct. Yep, in June of 2006.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think I got an email from Halligan July of 2006. He saw something I had written, and he was like, I think we kind of think around the same terms when it comes to small businesses and using this social technology stuff and social media stuff. And it was just that entry. And then he said, we're working on this platform and I think you'd really be interested in it. I was like, all right. I mean, I kind of hear this. I got to hear this a lot because I'm, one of those analyst guys, CRM space. But man, when I saw it, I was like, these guys are onto something. And now we're talking like 14 years later, man. Has it gone by fast? Has it gone by slow? How do you look back at what you guys have done when you think about 2006 and now you think about today?
Yeah, it's gone by, I guess I'll use a couple of adjectives. One is relatively, I'll say smoothly. You have the ups and downs of any startup. That's just the way it is. But I think of HubSpot almost in like multiple chapters. Like chapter one of our life was we were a marketing software company, and that's what we did, and that's what we were known for, and did the whole inbound marketing thing, and kind of promoted that movement. And then we were kind of got into sales and CRM, so expanded out. It's like, okay, it's a more kind of broader platform now. That was kind of chapter two, and we're kind of the tail end of chapter two, and like that's gone well. But yeah, it's been a fun ride. I'll say I've always thought myself, because I am a startup guy. And so people ask me, it's like, well, Dharmesh, HubSpot's closing in on 4,000 people now. Like, how have you lasted this long? And this is the honest truth. HubSpot's a publicly traded company now too. I'm having more fun now, and so is Brian Halligan. We've chatted about this, and it's like, okay, well, why is that? How can we be, as startup guys, be having more fun now than we were back in the kind of early years? And the simple answer is that we kind of get to sit at the grown-ups table to some degree now. We get to put down bets, and it's like, okay, we have this idea or this vision. We can actually do things and mobilize ideas, and we can bet on longer-term things. So it's nice not to have to. I mean, of course, you're always kind of worried about capital and things like that, but it's nice to have some of the early formative growth years behind us and be able to do kind of bigger things. So anyway.
Is there anything that you miss about the early days that you're like, yeah, I wish we could still do that kind of thing, particularly when it comes to entrepreneurship and kind of being a startup business?
Yeah, no, I mean, startups are awesome. I love, and I think I'm a startup person at my core. What I love about startups is there's this constant underdog mentality, right? It's like, okay, well, and you're not sure you're going to see next week or next month, or the company's going to still be around, and it's this roller coaster ride, which is a lot of fun. There's just so much uncertainty, and then the energy often in that early team is like these are all kind of people with a person. Not that we don't have a purpose and a mission now, we do, but when it's like, 3 people in a house plant, there's just a different dynamic. It's I recommend both. I recommend the startups to those that are sitting, considering it. I think it's an awesome thing to do in your life. But scale ups are fun too.
So in the beginning, it was you and Halligan. There's 2 guys. You just mentioned, we're 14 years into the journey, the HubSpot journey. Now there's closing in on 4,000. How has your relationship changed with Halligan from when it was just the 2 of you to now you're a publicly traded company, you've got almost 4,000 employees, but you guys are still together? Talk about how the relationship has kind of evolved over time and how you've been able to be successful and stay together, because a lot of these folks that start businesses over that amount of time, they're long gone.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think I attribute the modest success HubSpot's had so far to the fact that Brian and I get along so well, and it's always been the case from year one. In fact, I wasn't really supposed to start a company. I promised my wife that I was not going to start another company after I kind of sold my my first one, and part of the motivation was the fact that Brian and I got along so well. We had a shared passion for small business. We wanted to do a software company together. And I think what's made it last, it's like any other relationship, and you have to think about it that way. It's a relationship. There has to be mutual respect, if not admiration. There has to be kind of a sense of kind of shared understanding and shared purpose, which we've always had from the early days. And then we had a lot of I think this has helped, and I recommend this to co-founders in kind of in the early stages of a startup, is to have the difficult conversations early, right? It's like, okay, well, what if someone comes along and offers us $50 million or $100 million and wants to acquire the company? What if one of us wants to leave the company because we're no longer, like, what do we do in these situations? How do decisions get made? How does this work? And we had that in like week 1, right? Of like all the things. And the reason we started the company is there was overlap. It's like we both had some success in our past, but we had like a bit of a chip on our shoulder that we had something left to prove. We want one more step up to bat, so to speak. Even though I'm not a sports guy, I'll use a sports metaphor. But the relationship hasn't really evolved. Like the way we run the company now is very much the way we ran the company in year 1. It's that we kind of understand each other's kind of strengths and weaknesses. We have complementary backgrounds. So we have shared values, but divergent backgrounds. And I think that's helpful. He's kind of a sales and marketing guy. I'm a tech guy. So that's helped. It's been, but I think the number one thing is mutual respect and admiration. Number 2 thing, maybe even number 1 thing, is you have to enjoy spending time with that person. And as simple as that sounds, if that's not the case, if you're just doing it for the money or doing it for the success, and you just don't like being around that other individual, the startup's not going to work. It's just more startups fail for co-founder conflict probably than any other reason.
Very interesting, man. I'm sitting here, listening to you and talking about your relationship with Halligan and how he's the sales and marketing kind of guy, and you're like the technologist. You're the technologist, and you're an introvert, but you started thinking about corporate culture really early on in your development. Why don't you talk about when was it that you realized, man, we really got to put some formalization around culture for our organization, and why was it so important for you to really deep dive into that? Because that's what you did.
Yeah, it's a fun story. So I was not supposed to do culture. We hadn't really used the word culture a lot in the early years of HubSpot because we're a startup. It's like, okay, we've got product to build, we've got product to sell. Culture is something big companies deal with once they're 100, 500 people. And then Brian went to the CEO group, and he would meet with other CEOs in the area, some highfalutin folks whose names you'd recognize. And at this particular meeting, the theme was culture. And then Brian's response was very much our thinking at the time, which was like, okay, well, yeah, you folks are much further along than we are, and because they asked him, like, what are you doing on culture? And like, we're not doing anything yet. It's too early for us to really be thinking about that. And that group of CEOs really came down on him kind of hard. It's like, oh, you don't get it, Brian. Like culture is like the number one thing. There is nothing else. If you mess that up, nothing else will matter. So that was the kind of message he carried away. And he's like, okay, listen. And then we had a founders dinner shortly thereafter. He said, and he told me about this meeting. It's like, oh yeah, I had my group meeting with the CEOs, and evidently culture is like super important. It's going to determine our destiny. And it's and then this is a sentence I won't forget. It's like, Dharmesh, why don't you go do that? And so I look at him funny. It's like, okay, like I don't know what that means. Of all the people in the company, I'm the one that is like likes people the least. We would to like dig into culture? But he was a much busier person than I was. I'm like, okay, well, how hard could this be? Where there were fewer than 100 people at the time, and I looked at it like an engineer would look at it, which is okay. If I had to write a predictive function to calculate the probability that any given HubSpot person was going to succeed and be one of our stars, I don't know exactly what the weights are, but what would the coefficients be? What are the kinds of things that will likely play into it? Can I figure that out, at least kind of first order? And so I kind of dug in, got the data from the team. It's like, okay, are you happy at HubSpot? Why are you happy at HubSpot if you are? And why you're not if you're not? And that was the genesis. So it's kind of started really small as a kind of this internal thing. And I wrote this slide deck, which was 16 slides at the time, called the Culture Code. And a fun fact about the Culture Code slide, which has since become relatively popular because we've made it public, is that people say, oh, it's like a code of conduct thing, the word code. Like, no, in my mind, the code was like literally if I could write code to run the company, make all the decisions, here's the stuff that I would do. It's the heuristics behind how we operate the company. So it's more of an operating system than anything else. But yeah, then ever since then, it's weird because I have no direct reports at HubSpot, right? It's like that was one of the early kind of founding principles of HubSpot, that as I would not have direct reports because I suck at management. I'm just not good at it. So yeah, it's been interesting. So although I was a unlikely kind of official keeper of HubSpot culture, it's worked out pretty well, and it's partly because I'm outside looking in, but I don't have a horse in the race. I'm not part of any particular team. I can take more of an engineer and scientist kind of view of it. So I kind of just see what I get through osmosis from the team and figure it out. And then the Culture Code's now on version 33. We just published an update recently. It's been a fascinating journey. Just of all the code I've ever written, I'll say this: that's likely been the most impactful. Wow. So it's not the software; it's been that. That slide deck is in terms of my contribution to HubSpot. That's probably number one on the list.
That's pretty amazing to say, since you were there from the beginning, but built the platform. But we're in like interesting times right now. It's 2020. All sorts of things have gone on. How is the current situation with the pandemic, with even social unrest? How are all these developments that are taking place right now? Has that had any kind of impact on how you view things professionally and even personally at this point?
It has. I mean, I think it's had an impact on every person, every company. From HubSpot's perspective, one of our core values has always been empathy. And if ever there was a time for organizations to have empathy for their people and for the people to have empathy for each other, this has been that year. It's been a very challenging year for so many. And so one of the kind of early decisions we made during the pandemic is that we're gonna lean into that. We've been fortunate in terms of the company's been doing relatively well. We've got $1 billion on the balance sheet, so it's so we can afford to actually kind of ride out the storm, so to speak. So we were kind of as empathetic as possible in terms of giving people the flexibility in terms of we don't know what people's individual kind of home situations are. They could be parents, they could be taking care of elders. So that and I give credit to the people operations team at HubSpot and Katie Burke, our chief people officer. They've just managed through that exceptionally well, and I think that's been super important. And then the social. I mean, we've had just so many. Like 2020 is like it's almost like the perfect storm. Like all the things that could go wrong have been going wrong worldwide. So it's been
yeah. So also let's just talk about CRM. I mean, let's kind of get into the wheelhouse a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, you guys built your interaction platform is marketing, and then you built CRM and sales and service into it. How have you seen CRM evolve since you began HubSpot to where we are today? Some people say the principles haven't really changed. It's just the kind of the way it's trying to be implemented, the way people are trying to leverage technology, but the philosophies and kind of the foundational aspects pretty much the same. How do you see it?
I think that's mostly true, right? I mean, customers are customers. I think we are, as a society, more skeptical of the companies we buy from and the people we do business with. So that's kind of changed. The relationship between buyers and sellers, that's changed. But in terms of CRM as an industry, I think what's happened is that if you look at kind of first generation CRM, Siebel and those folks, that kind of lay the early groundwork, and you have Salesforce for kind of, I'll think of it as generation 2. The one thing we've learned though is that in the early formation of CRM, and it's like one of the questions I've asked myself is, why are there not more CRM software companies? Like why, there should be literally hundreds, right? There's hundreds of marketing software apps, and arguably CRM is much more important. I think the challenge is that CRM is actually hard because the expectations of the industry now versus let's say even 15 years ago, CRM was thought of as a database to keep track of your customers. That was the fundamental kind of use case. Like you need a shared database where all your customer data was, and it evolved to a degree. That's okay. Well, it's not just individual contacts, but it's also companies and deals and all. But the underlying kind of architecture was relatively straightforward, right? It's like, okay, I've got this database. And what's happened now is that in order to really effectively compete in the CRM industry, you can't just be that database. You have to be a platform. And the thing that's becoming clear now is, and when most people think of platform, it's like, oh, other people are building on top of it. You have APIs and you can kind of extend it. And that's all very, very true. But the other part of it is, to what degree is the company itself leveraging the platform in terms of, are the various kind of software services being used cohesively across the whole thing, right? So it kind of sort of makes sense. And so the way I think about it is, at HubSpot, we have this term we use called our primary colors. And these are the kind of shared software services that underlie the actual HubSpot platform. And that's been important. So for instance, we started in marketing, and we had a marketing automation application, as you would expect. But we took the word kind of marketing off the front of it. What it really was an automation system that says, okay, well, you want to be able to do these workflows and to have this branching logic and do these things and send this email out. Awesome, that's great. But automation is actually important in sales. There is such a thing as sales automation, that you want to do similar but not the same things. Same thing in the service, right? It's like, oh, if a ticket's been outstanding for more than 90 days, I want to send this series of emails out. I want to escalate. I want, like deep down inside, it's all the same thing. It's all automation. You're taking manual processes that might have happened and you're trying to code software. And I think what the CRM players have done, I think well, is like thinking of that in a broader sense. It's like, yeah, like automation is the same. And HubSpot has definitely thought of it this way, which is, once you learn how automation works within HubSpot, it can cascade across all the other kind of groups, right? It works the same way because it's the same software. I think that's helpful. But so the big shift that we've seen is just like number of channels, the number of interactions we have with customers is obviously dramatically higher over the last couple of decades. And the other thing is, and this is, I think, the big shift, right, is customer expectations. Back then, I'll say 20 years ago, CRM, to be doing CRM right, it was even though it's considered a front office application because it kind of has got the word customer in it, it was mostly a back office thing. It was a database, and the sales reps and the customer team and people would use it, but the customers would never really directly interact with it, not in any meaningful way. Today, most successful businesses kind of recognize that every business is a digital business. You have to be online. You have to have a website. If someone has an issue, they have to be able to report. They have to be able to track their order. And so the level of expectations of consumers, the end-to-end customer, of what the CRM, they may not even know what a CRM is, but they know they want to get the status on their order, that they know, right? Right. And that's the one thing the pandemic has accelerated, is that, so people have known that they need to go digital and do more of that, and they've seen this kind of steady rise in customer expectations. The pandemic has been kind of a forcing function. It's like, okay, if you were sitting on the sidelines wondering whether you should do this, you are no longer wondering. You can't not be online, right? Like, it just doesn't, it doesn't work. So we saw, and this is kind of put some wind in HubSpot sails, is, no pun intended, is people are just ready to get something out there. Like they want their website connected to their CRM, connected to, like, everything has to kind of fit together. So we've had our best quarter ever last quarter, even amidst this, just because there's this higher sense of urgency now. But yeah.
Are you surprised at some of the sizes and scales of some of these acquisitions that are taking place in the industry? We just, Salesforce just bought Slack for like $27 billion. And I think the year before that, they bought Tableau for about 16 billion, and Oracle and Adobe are making purchases, SAP. Are you surprised at that? Or is this something that you expect to be kind of status quo for the foreseeable future?
I think it's yeah, sometimes we'll have acquisitions that some might argue were, overpriced or underpriced. But in the overall grand scheme of things, the public markets are relatively efficient. And if any individual company was, overpaying, for a series of companies in a row, whatever, it would impact their individual stock price as people lost. At the broad level, I think what's happening is it's just a reflection of value and opportunity, right? That says, okay, we thought we had seen, all this growth in CRM, and there's certainly been growth, and there have been massive companies created in the industry. We're nowhere near done. We haven't scratched the surface. There are millions of companies that would benefit from what we think of as a modern CRM now that aren't yet, right? It's like it's just not there. Like the penetration, as proud of as we are of our accomplishments, HubSpot's a reasonably large company now. Our market share is still in single digits, right? There's just so much room out there to grow, because especially in small business, I think the thing I get excited about is that I think a lot of the big players got a lot of things right in terms of CRM and building out the platform and being open and all those things, and those are wonderful. The thing that I think HubSpot's getting right is for the kind of small and medium-sized business. For if you're a startup or a scale-up, you need something that's simpler. So we're trying to democratize, like, stuff that historically only the Fortune 1000 or Fortune 5000 have had access to. We're trying to bring it down. It's like, okay, well, you too, 50-person consulting company, deserve a website that's connected to your CRM, and have a ticketing system, and people can send you an email to support at acmeconsulting.com. All that is possible today, right? Like, we have tools, so we just think there's massive opportunity in small business, and they would benefit greatly. They've been kind of kept out of the dance, so to speak. They haven't been invited because it's just been so complicated. We're trying to change that.
What do you think the industry hasn't gotten right so far? Are you surprised that it hasn't evolved to the point where it should be when it comes to CRM, and particularly when it comes to customer experience, when it comes to actually building the relationship with the customer?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I think part of the issue is, and this is one I'm deeply passionate about, is that the website, which is often the kind of point of contact for most customers with the companies that they deal with, is often this thing that sits off to the side that gets updated every now and then, and IT might own it or somebody else might own it. It's in a server somewhere hosted. Like, it's not an integral part of the overall customer experience. So I think one of the things, and this is changing now, is I think like a content management system and your website is an integral part of the customer experience. And in my mind, it's part of CRM, right? Like, you don't have a digital experience without the primary channel that your customers are going to experience you being this kind of disconnected thing that every now and then you maintain an update. Like, it has to be kind of all together. And so that's why partly we're making a big investment in trying to make a CMS that is not about building websites, but it's about delivering digital experiences that's part of the overall kind of CRM platform.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think if you thought about CRM from the customer's perspective, things would be a little different than it is from the, like you said, it was built on that foundation of managers wanting to know what sales prospects with the forecast, not as much really what do the customers need, what kind of experiences do they want to stay on board.
Yeah,
I hope we're getting to that part.
Yeah, I'll give the industry credit. We are collectively recognizing kind of customer needs and the fact that this is what they want. We're delivering with varying levels of progress, but I mean, I think the sentiment is definitely there, and and I think it's partly driven by kind of the B2C market, right? Like so overall, I think we kind of steadily moved in the right direction, albeit slower than some would like. But B2B has been even slower, right? Like some of the B2C companies, they kind of grew up with that and grew up with the internet. It's been around for a long time. But B2B companies still often are It's like, okay, well, I'm going to email you this PDF and you can like review the pricing proposal and then scan it and sign it. And they're like, okay, no, that doesn't make sense, right? Like there's no customer on the planet that wants that experience. So I think we need to get better faster up. I think there's still massive opportunity for improving the customer experience, for making things more efficient, and getting more companies to participate in this new kind of digital economy.
Hey, do you mind taking maybe one or two questions? Because there's some really interesting ones
Absolutely.
that I think are right up your alley here. Here's one from Seshu Kumar Loka. I hope I'm saying your name right. But Dharmesh, great to be hearing you live. Would like to know what is your scale-up advice? What would you ask someone to focus on?
So a couple of things. It depends on what level of scale-up. But the thing that, and this is not just from HubSpot, is I've talked to hundreds of entrepreneurs, over the course of my professional career. The best scale-ups are the ones that are like maniacally obsessed with the customer and their problems. It's like, okay, and not obsessed with their particular solution, right? So if you look at it from HubSpot's perspective, yep, we did pretty well in the marketing business, and the company grew and scaled. But the thing we really realized, right, is like, okay, well, and we were attached to this kind of startup and scale-up community and small businesses. But it's like, okay, we hadn't really solved the full problem. It's like marketing was a piece of it. And so we didn't shy away from it. It's like, okay, well, here's the thing they actually need in order to do the things we know they need to be doing. So my kind of somewhat trite advice would be like spend a lot of time with customers, dig deep into the actual issues they have. Don't get overly attached to your particular solution right now, because that can and probably will change in terms of what technologies or what kinds of things you're doing. But the problems don't change that often. The things that customers are trying to do is actually a relatively slow moving thing. And so that's an easier thing to kind of grasp. But startups often fail is because they become too infatuated with what they're doing and the product they're building. And I'm, as an engineer, I can kind of speak to that, but it's get obsessed with your customers instead.
Awesome. Here's another one from my buddy Anand Thakur. Thoughts on the future of e-commerce in the SMB startup scene? Yeah.
Hi, Anand. Good to see you. I think we've just seen the beginning of it, right? So we have e-commerce, made popular now by companies like Shopify, which is an amazing company. But in the same way that e-commerce drove, 10 years ago, a lot of the kind of expectations and the evolution of the B2B side of things, we're going to see the same on with respect to e-commerce now. So it's not going anywhere. Yes, it got accelerated by the pandemic, but we're not going to wake up someday after the vaccines are out and everyone's kind of doing a lot better and saying, oh yeah, I want to go back to the old ways of like shopping and doing business and things like that. That's just not going to happen. That world is not coming back. So I think it creates massive opportunities across the board. So you thought marketing was interesting back in 2006 when HubSpot got started, and we see the MarTech landscape from Scott Brinker. We're going to see something awfully similar to that, I think, over the next decade in e-commerce, broadly speaking.
Okay, here's one from a buddy of mine who's Boston-based. He wants to ask what he thinks is the most. Apparently, he didn't catch the beginning of the show. So, Bob, I got to ding you on that one. What's his favorite football team? I'll tell you who it is, because this is Bob. He's a Boston guy. He's like Halligan. He's all in on all Boston sports. So I know what he's getting at, because he knows I have an issue with the Patriots particularly. Right, guess what, Bob? He doesn't have a favorite.
I don't. A fun fact, I've never been to a football game. I've watched one Super Bowl game way back when. I don't know. Anyway, so I'm not a sports guy. Sorry, I have to take a pass on that one.
All right, and this is just, don't worry about Bob. He'll get over it. And this is just a good listening to customers is important right in the time for the pandemic. What have you changed in this direction since COVID-19?
A couple things. So as soon as COVID hit, one of the first things we did was asked ourselves as a leadership team, like, what can we do to help? Like, what's the thing that we can do to help? Because we're in the small business world. And so what we did tactically was we said, okay, here are a bunch of features that are in our paid version. We're going to bring them down to the free version for X period of time, so people can kind of respond to emails and do the things that we knew were common to do during the pandemic. That was one. We brought some of our pro level features down to the kind of starter, which was a much more affordable price. We took the price of that product down by about 50-ish%. We did cash advances for some of our partners that says, hey, we know you're going to make this up or whatever. We're going to pay you for your commissions that we know you're going to make over the next 90, 120 days. and we're going to cut you that check. We wired that money within 72 hours of making that decision. I was quite proud of the team, just the logistics of that. But it's just a recognition, I guess, that companies were going through a hard time. And it was funny because as a technologist, I'm like, oh, like what do we need to build in order to make this? And the thing that came back, in talking to our customers and partners was it wasn't about building more things. It was about making things more accessible and easy and kind of just so they could kind of get started with it. So yeah, those are changes. And as far as the company itself, we leaned into empathy. It's like, okay, everyone's dealing with tough times, shut the office down, let people choose. And that's one of the things we've put into place longer term now, going into 2021, is giving all 4,000 employees the option of whether they work full-time out of an office, flex time, 2 or 3 days a week out of an office, or go fully remote, because everyone's situation has just been impacted as different.
Yeah. I love leading with empathy, and customers respect you and will stay with you if when the chips are down for them, you're there for them. When they're good times, they're going to stick with you, but it's all about what happens when I need you. And if you can prove that you care beyond the transaction, you've got them for life. Yeah.
And then the other thing that's, I think, really super important on the empathy thing is that I think we would all recognize that the people are the most important thing. So if, we would not be able to deliver the product or have the growth or have the amount of success we've had without the people that work at HubSpot. Well, the truth is the best people like to see that empathy and like to see that obsession with the customer or whatever. So it's great that our customers will stay with us. It's equally important that the people that we have on the HubSpot team is like, that's the kind of company I can see myself working for long term. That's the kind of company I'm going to recommend to my friends and family to kind of join. It's like, this is the best place ever. And that's probably as impactful as any other thing we could do in HubSpot, is to make sure that great people join and stay at HubSpot.
Yeah, that is so true. Sometimes we kind of think about the purely on the customer side, but the employee experience, I mean, they want to have pride in where they're working. They want to be able to walk around and say, yeah, I do work for HubSpot, and I'm proud of it. That makes them want to stay around longer. That's great stuff.
Yeah.
I don't Kanan Regu. Once again, I apologize if I'm not getting your name correctly. But what was your biggest hurdle in driving growth in very early stage of HubSpot, and what strategy did you apply?
Okay, let's lots of obstacles. I'll start with a couple of the higher order ones. One was just convincing the world that we were right. It's like, okay, you should be doing this inbound marketing thing. You should be blogging. You should be kind of shifting your marketing budget dollars, because it was a relatively new idea 14 years ago. So that's one. Number two, raising capital was actually harder than one would have thought. Brian and I had kind of both done things before. We would have thought, okay, well, we're kind of known the Boston community. It's like, it shouldn't be that hard. It was hard. And HubSpot's, by design, not the kind of company that was meant to be bootstrapped. It was the kind of company that was going after high growth. When Brian and I started, we decided we're going to swing for the fences, so to speak. That's two sports metaphors from a non-sports guy. But so the hardest thing is that as a SaaS company, the price points were so low that just like getting the growth and getting that curve to move forward is just so small. So it's just hard to, and so we were, burning cash month after month. And then this is the weird thing about SaaS, is that, all your marketing and sales expenses to acquire a customer occur upfront, right? You're trying to get them, you're trying to do whatever you do to kind of get them. And the payment comes up over time, right? In the enterprise software world, it's like you sold a customer and they paid you $500,000 and you were profitable from like week one. Right. That's not the way it works in SaaS, especially for early stage companies. And so the weird mathematical dynamic was the faster we were growing, the more cash we burned, which is kind of paradoxical, right? It's like, okay, then we'd have to explain that. It's like, okay, well, you guys are growing, but then you're burning even more cash than you were burning before. Like, what's up? And that continued, right, all the way up until our IPO. But I mean, the economics made sense if you knew what was going on behind the scenes, but that was relatively new back then. So that was, but it's just the blocking and tackling. It's like there was no Monday morning where the HubSpot founders woke up and said, oh my God, everything went up by 4x yesterday. We don't know why. It was a grind it out, slog it out, customer after customer. It was a very smooth curve in terms of the growth curve, but it was a slow curve. It takes a while. So if you're doing a startup, you have to be in it for the long game. Like it's not going to work. It's always going to take you longer. Overnight successes take about 7 years.
One last question from Alan here. Well, let me post it here. At what did you and Brian say,
Yep.
hey, we got something here and it's going to be big?
One of those points, I'll talk about the earliest one because it was the most telling. So we were in the SaaS business and selling on a monthly subscription basis. And the first evidence, right? And so we sold, this is one, if I had 3 pieces of advice to give entrepreneurs, one would be kind of sell the product early and sell it often, right? So a lot of entrepreneurs make this, it's like, oh, well, the product's in early beta, so I don't feel good like charging for it, and that's going to reduce my thing. I'm trying to, build like the next Facebook or something like that. It's like, all fine, but if you're looking for evidence that a market exists, the only reliable evidence that a market exists is to actually try to sell customers and see if a market exists, right? Like they get, and so even when the product was in late alpha, early beta, we picked a price point, we didn't overthink it, and we started selling it. So evidence number one that we might be onto something is people bought it. Like shocking, holy crap, people are like willing to pay us money. But the bigger proof point, and we intentionally said we're only going to do month-to-month contracts because the data, in terms of we want every single month, we want every single customer to be making the choice whether they continue to pay us. So you could not buy an annual contract with HubSpot back then because the data was just so integral. So the thing that convinced us that we might be onto something is that despite the fact that early product sucked, customers continued to renew and didn't. We didn't have a 90% cancellation rate or something like that, and the product would go down. Like it was early stage software. And so it's like, okay, the pain is acute enough, and we're making enough progress that customers are staying for the most part. That was the thing. It's like, okay, if we just keep doing this, I think we'll be onto something big. So we just kept making the product better and just kept selling more customers and just kept going. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, Alan was mentioned a little earlier that it's rather poignant that there's a picture or a portrait of John Lennon in the background. So I'm guessing that means I was kind of right about this being the 40th anniversary. So what does Lennon mean to you? Why is he hanging up there and right above your fireplace?
A couple of things behind that painting. The idea of Lennon, the ideas he kind of expounded, like especially in this time and day, it's like, okay, it's like peace and harmony are something that are just completely core to who I am. It's the live and let live. Like, why can't we all get along? The world should be a better place than it is. So that's part of it. I just like the idea of John Lennon. I've been trying to teach myself piano, so I've been getting into music more because I've never played Western music before. I can play by ear a little bit. That's part of it. And then that particular painting was by a local artist here in the Boston area that I've met named Jack Moorfield. And you can't see it at this particular angle, but the painting's actually constructed. It's like a pointillism style pointing where they're all tiny little circles and swirls. So it's not like there's no lines at all in the entire painting. So if you step up close to it, you can see that it's formed by all these little things. And that to me has a larger message as well. It's like everybody's actually a constitution of like it looks like this. Oh, there's his face. When you get really up close to it at a micro level, yeah. Anyway, this is kind of
very cool. So, what's going to happen when this is going to be the final question? Because I'm just appreciative of your time, but I got to ask you, what do you see after we're finally past the pandemic? What do you expect in terms of companies, customer expectations, digital transformation? What do you see happening immediately after, and what are the long-term effects of that immediate reaction?
Yeah, well, the immediate, I think, just as for humanity at large, right? This will be, it's the worst thing we've experienced in our lifetime collectively as a species, and so just to be able to breathe a sigh of relief, right? That says, okay, well, we've got this under control. Because right now, it's scary, right? It's the scary everywhere. Like it's, to varying degrees, but it's like super scary, scariest thing we've ever encountered. So that's number one. Is I look forward to just not being this kind of constant level of anxiety of varying levels. I think what that does is that frees up people to start thinking about the future again. Start saying it's like, okay, well, we're kind of through that. Our adrenaline levels can kind of go back down, and we can say, okay, let's start. Not that you stop thinking about customers. Obviously, intensifies the focus on the business if you're in a business, but. So that'll be the first thing. Is I think we'll all heave a collective sigh of relief. And my hope is that I'm the optimist, right? The eternal optimist is that in many ways, and yes, we've had social distancing and we've been separated, and that's been hard. But my personal experience, it's also actually brought us closer together. So I know people within HubSpot now that I normally wouldn't have interacted with because everybody's remote. Everybody's working from from home right now, and so we can be more inclusive in our meetings. We just had our first virtual event, inbound, and so I think we've kind of learned. I'm not saying that Zoom is going to replace for all eternity how we meet and things like that, but it's an important having that tool set it's important. It's nice to be able to get together virtually and still be effective, right? Not to say there's not value to getting together in person. So I think that's the other thing. I think we'll be better businesses and better people having been shaped by the pandemic, and no one wishes for a global pandemic, but I think we're going to emerge stronger personally.
That's great. That is great. And I really appreciate this great conversation. And let me do a shout out to one of your folks who kind of came on board recently, Scott Wilder. He's a buddy of mine. Known him since his days at Intuit. Man, that was a long time ago. But he's a great guy, and I wanted to shout out him. And that's a great hire for you guys, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that.
Thanks again, man, for making time. This has been great. And Anand, we did talk about the culture stuff earlier, so why don't you check out the replay, and you'll get his thoughts on that and why it was important for him to do it and the way he did it. It's really fascinating stuff. But Dharmesh, thanks again for your time, man. And let's make sure. Do you think this was a decent experience? Because I know you don't like doing a lot of this stuff, but do you think you might want to do more of these things in the future?
With you, yes, Brent. I'll say this. My issue is not, once I'm on, I can kind of sort of forget the camera and we can just have a conversation. But I'll tell you this, like 3 a.m. last night, I kid you not, I'm curled up in the fetal position knowing that I have this coming up, right? So actually public speaking, not that big of an issue for me, honestly. I can do it. Like I can put sentences together by forming words and stuff. I can do that. It's all the time leading up to that actual thing. So if someone like shook me in the middle of the afternoon and was like, Dharmesh, like do this, that might actually be preferable to having to kind of prepare for something and stress out over. Anyway, but thanks for having me. It was a enjoyable experience. I will put it to you that way.
Oh, thank you very much. And you're great on screen. And wow, I bet it's probably harder for you to do this stuff than it is to build a company like HubSpot, which is kind of funny, but I appreciate you doing this all the same. Thanks again. And let's talk sooner rather than later. Take care.
Thank you.